Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and today I'm going to be doing my Starfield early review. I mean, the game isn't even out yet, but I am one of the people who has early access because the day the early access came up, I ended up pre-ordering the game so I could play it early and I could get a review kind of out before the game actually released. Because Starfield was one of those games that I personally was really worried about, right? I wanted to be at least pretty sure if this game was going to be good or bad, and I didn't feel like waiting a whole other week, I guess, to watch all these other people play when I could just play the game myself. So I went ahead and bit the bullet and pre-ordered so I could get some access to this game, and I've put some time into it now. I've had a couple days to kind of play around with it, explore the world a little bit that Bethesda created inside this game, get a good feel for everything, kind of get into the story and just really see if this game is actually going to live up to the hype, because this is obviously a game that has technically been in the works for like 25 years. And they started actually developing it back in late 2015, I believe, after Fallout 4 released. And so this has been a game, it's been on the burner for a minute, right? And people have been aware of its existence for quite some time. And as we started finally getting drip-fed information about this game throughout that time, the hype kind of built up more and more, it seems like, right? Like people were just getting like unusually hyped for this game, myself included. Now, I'm a pretty big fan typically of Bethesda games. I mean, Fallout New Vegas, Skyrim, even Fallout 4 I really enjoy. Fallout 3, a lot of these games, man, Oblivion, these are some of my favorite games of all time. I have a lot of fond memories with these games and with these franchises. Bethesda has like genuinely been a pretty big part of not only my childhood going into adulthood, but also just a big part of my gaming experience altogether. And so I was pretty nervous for Starfield as somebody who absolutely hated Fallout 76 when it came out. Like to the point that I refused to ever play it again. Like I was so disappointed by that game that I just don't even want anything to do with it. So I was pretty nervous, but I ended up pre-ordering and getting into the game, and I have a pretty good list of the different things that I've kind of experienced and had some time to play around with. And so I'm going to divide this up pretty simply, by things that I like and by things that I don't like. Of course, there's going to be some elements to the game that fall outside of these two parameters, but in general, that's kind of the criteria that I've fit everything down into, so I can just kind of make this a little bit easier for you guys to watch. I feel like bouncing back and forward is probably not the best way to approach this. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that I like. So one of the first things that I was kind of worried about, a little bit more relieved when I started seeing gameplay, and then of course ultimately relieved when I started actually playing the game, was the gunplay. So I wasn't a huge fan of a lot of the shooting mechanics in like Fallout 4, for example. To me personally, it felt really clunky. It felt like it could have been way smoother. It could have been way more actually thrilling and enjoying, like there could actually be something there that really wasn't there, and it kind of continued with Fallout 76. So I was pretty nervous. I feel like Bethesda, I don't know, some of their shooting mechanics just haven't been for me, but I actually really do enjoy it in this game a lot more. Now, it's definitely not perfect. There could be a lot of things I feel like they could do to actually make it better, but it does feel, for the most part, a lot smoother. The gunplay itself is a lot better. I feel like the recoil is a little better in this game. Not, easier by any, I would say, sort of stretch, more or less about just how it feels. I think that's kind of important in shooting mechanics, is just like, does that recoil actually suck? Does it feel weird? Does it feel clunky? How do weapons react when they're being used? Those kinds of things, they are more important than I feel like a lot of people realize. I thought it was pretty decent in this game. I mean, like I said, it could have been better, but I think it was a pretty good step up for Bethesda. It is definitely serviceable. I also thought the character customization was pretty decent. I mean, we saw it, obviously, through a lot of the gameplay beforehand. We'd seen some footage of just kind of how it worked, but I thought it was pretty cool. I enjoyed putting my character together. Truthfully, I didn't spend a whole lot of time developing my character and customizing it, more or less because I wanted to get into the actual gameplay, but I did go ahead and, create my custom character or whatever. I'm assuming a lot of people did, the most ridiculous builds they could, made them funny or goofy looking. I decided to go with pink hair on Christopher Moltisanti. That is my custom character, so there's just honestly a ton of different options, and, it really goes beyond just, oh, do you want him to be boy or girl? What color hair? What color eyes? Things like that. It went beyond that. For instance, the traits were pretty cool. So you basically get like 3 slots where you can pick from a list of traits that will kind of affect how your character interact, how they behave and whatnot, right? For instance, there's like one, you can pick a trait called Dream House, where eventually in the story, you just get like a free property worth like 125, 150,000 credits, and you can like deck it out and, you know, put furniture in it, do whatever you want with it, right? And then of course there's other traits that actually, you know, affect like your actual gameplay, right? It's not, oh, you get a free house. It's more like, you know, what religious background do you have, right? Do you follow this religion or that religion? Or like, were you born in the United Colonies or were you born as a Free Star citizen, right? Like these types of things also do kind of minorly influence like the dialogue too. I noticed the further I got into the game and I started talking to more people throughout space and whatnot, when you talk to them, for instance, I picked that I was a United Colonies native, right? So if, you know, in some sort of, I guess, dialogue, the United Colonies would kind of pop up in conversation, there was new dialogue options that went along where, you know, just because I was a United Colony citizen, I could say this. Or if you found someone who's Free Star and you were born Free Star or whatever, you could say that. These kinds of things I think are really cool. Obviously, kind of builds into that Bethesda RPG standard we've seen, where, you know, there's a ton of different dialogue options depending on some choices you make in the game. It can influence different things, right? Different dialogue options and whatever. Especially if you like upgrade your charisma stats and whatnot, or you say put some skill points into like trying to persuade people or lying and deceiving, things like that. So I personally picked the soldier background. There's like 20 different backgrounds you can pick between like bounty hunter, diplomat, like a soldier, a stealth operative, all these different options that once again affect different stat boosts that you have in the early game. It's pretty cool. I actually really enjoyed that. And speaking of the dialogue options, I actually have enjoyed the dialogue in this game. Now, a lot of people I've seen online have been saying they think that it's lacking or they think that the dialogue could have been better. Certainly, some of the dialogue has been kind of cheesy or corny from time to time, but honestly, I expect that in not only a Bethesda game, but just in video games in general, right? I mean, that kind of thing is definitely not typical, or I should say like atypical only with like a Starfield type of game. So it just really comes down to what you, I would say, had your expectations going into this game for. I mean, if you thought you were getting masterclass, perfect dialogue that doesn't get boring at some points, it's not going to happen. I mean, it's an RPG. Sometimes I do find myself skipping through some of like when the other characters are talking to me because honestly, I can read the subtitles faster than the audio plays from their mouth. And so by the time I'm done reading, I just don't care to hear what I've already read, so I skip ahead. But, you know, that's kind of a more personal thing. If you read slower, that probably isn't as much of an issue. But the different dialogue options have been pretty cool. For instance, pretty early game, there is a mission where I, you know, continued through this quest line and I needed to speak to these two diplomats, right? And this one was being kind of cunty, right? She was being an asshole to me. Very condescending. And so, you know, I did whatever the mission required of me. And then when I came back, I had acquired blackmail on her because instead of just leaving and ending the quest there, I spoke to like one of her underlings across the hall. I lied to this fucking guy a couple times. He ends up believing me, and now he's working for me, helping me access this UC spy device that was in her house. So now, instead of just listening to this woman be a bitch and just walking away, I have now infiltrated her like staff. I have broken into her home and I'm stealing all of her shit for money. I get the spy device that has blackmail on her, and then I blackmail her. And she's like, I gotta give you this really rare weapon now because fucking, you know, you got this blackmail. But it doesn't stop there. I'm like, oh, she was being an ass at the beginning, but now I got her on the ropes. So I keep persuading until she ends up giving me like thousands of credits. And yeah, I get rich. So just like having those different options to be like, oh, maybe I will just take it on the chin this time, or insult them. Fuck you, you know, like don't talk to me like that. Or try to lie to them or persuade them. You know, these different options, it's really refreshing and fun to finally have a game that really gives you that freedom of choice again. I feel like there hasn't been many games that I've gotten a hold of in a long ass time that have like a decent system like this. So it really gives a lot of gameplay variety too, because the different paths that you take obviously have different directions that they can take the quest. I mean, depending on what stats you've upgraded and whatnot over time, the further you get into the game, you can do more things. Like I said, you can lie to people better, or you can try and influence their opinions easier, or, you know, maybe you can slick talk your way into a cheaper price with a vendor. There's like obviously different options that you can go down. If you've never played a Bethesda RPG, or really an RPG with this kind of system before, you know, you might be a little, I would say, perplexed by it. But I mean, it's pretty typical, I feel like. It has all of the big standard issue things that I would expect with a Bethesda RPG. I mean, so far the game exploration's been pretty fun. I've liked actually, you know, seeing what all the different planets have to offer. Some of the planets are definitely way more bare bones than they could have been, and that might disappoint some people, but there is like 1,000 or something explorable planets, so there really isn't a shortage of content, you know? The different storylines, the side quests, all the different opportunities you have to really explore and just see what the, I would say, universe around you in here actually has is just really enjoyable. I mean, there's so many different, like I said, factions, religions, different paths of like life really you can walk. And in a world where obviously that's like the forefront, that's what you're supposed to be doing, having so much different content in so many different directions has been pretty awesome. For instance, there's times throughout the game where you could be working on the main quest line and then you get a little side quest that you think, you know, I could complete this in 5 minutes. Next thing you know, you're on Mars fighting fucking space bandits and you're looking for somewhere to start a house and you're romancing your side characters and whatnot, right? Like there's just so many infinite different directions that the game can take you in based on what you want to do. And it's one of those games that, sure, if you want to just complete the main story, you know, you're still going to get a couple dozen hours of fun. Don't get me wrong on that. But if you want to really explore what the game has for you and you want to really delve into that content, this is going to be a game I feel like I could easily put 500 plus hours into, simply because of all the different mechanisms, all the different ways you can take it. There's obviously room for several playthroughs. It's not a one and done game. If you want to, you know, create a new character, you know, play different difficulties, have different backgrounds, different storylines to explore, there's so many different ways to go with it. And that's obviously what people expected. I mean, this was a game that was marketed as a, oh, you create your own story, you go along in this vast fucking expanse of space and do whatever you want. And it's very true to that standard. They really did deliver on that promise. I mean, if you want to just be a space bandit who racks up bounties and is not really good anywhere, you can do that. If you want to be the hero the universe deserves, you can do that. If you want to try and piece together the relationships of different groups and like use your words and diplomatic skills to really excel, you can do that. There's so many different ways to go. Also, since it is a Bethesda game, one thing that I was quite worried about was going to be the performance. You know, how many glitches was there going to be? Was there going to be any game-breaking bugs? Was it going to even be playable in the first place? Now, the first night I tried to play it, I made the grave mistake of installing this game to my hard drive instead of an SSD. I'm playing on PC, so I have that option. I know the modern consoles, I believe, are all on SSD now, but I have both. So all of my YouTube shit obviously is on my SSD, didn't really have a lot of space, had to do some work to get it moved over. But once I got it to SSD like the game actually requires, it's been pretty goddamn smooth. There's been very little to no issues. I mean, obviously, some areas kind of have a little bit of frame rate loss. I mean, there's a few hitches every once in a while. Usually these are in more graphics intensive areas or like cutscenes. They're not really like in important or intense moments where like that could really fuck up the gameplay. There hasn't really been any like game breaking bug or glitch. There really hasn't been a bug or glitch that I've noticed that's like even really thrown me for a loop. Like in my personal experience having it on SSD on PC, Starfield has been one of the more relatively stable Bethesda launches I've ever seen. I mean, they did work on this game for like 8 years, so they definitely, I would say, had some time to polish it up and, you know, put some pretty good gloss on it and everything. But even then, right, like I said, Bethesda, they're known for buggy launches. They're known for their products coming out with these kinds of issues. Starfield, I feel like, keeps it to a pretty good minimum. And a lot of the people that I've seen complaining about their performance, complaining about these problems, are people who probably installed on a hard drive and not an SSD. On top of this, I've also really enjoyed the ships in the game so far, the customization capabilities by being able to buy new ships and whatnot and actually kind of make them your own in a way, right? Like actually having that ability to make your vehicle something actually worth value. I mean, some ships in this game can get quite fucking expensive. So it's one of those things like, hey, do you want a better ship? Do you want to grind for this? Do you want to really put the time and effort into it? Do you want to build up your skill points and skill trees to cater to your vehicle even more, right? Like these are the kinds of things that really help flesh together all the concepts of the game, because sure, you can spend all your time delving into the story, doing side quests, you know, trying to grind credits, just being a douchebag in space if you want to, or you can spend it, you know, working up for a house or trying to get your UC citizenship or, you know, in this instance, fucking around with the ships and seeing what you can do with those, right? And on top of the ship customization, I've actually enjoyed, like, actually using the ship out in space. I feel like the space fights are kind of cool. The Crimson Fleet, the pirates that constantly will show up in a lot of areas in the game, they've been pretty awesome, honestly. Like, it's been pretty fun to just kind of fly around in space shooting down ships. Now, I will say that I wouldn't say the ship combat is difficult per se. I mean, if you're not really used to these kinds of mechanics, it might take a second to get used to, but overall, it's pretty easy. But it's fun. It's fun. It's not one of those things that you're gonna want to probably spend 30 hours in the game doing, but it is one of those things that obviously it is important at times throughout the story and different quest lines. It will happen at times. You will deal with pirates and whatnot. So these kinds of things, right? Like, it's just cool to see because, I mean, you look at other games on the market like No Man's Sky, right? It launched, it was supposed to have all these cool space features like that. Didn't really have them at launch, and that's the game that a lot of people are comparing this one to. Ultimately, I feel like they're not really comparable because Starfield is more of a story-driven, limited scope thing, while No Man's Sky is supposed to be, you know, procedurally generated, millions upon millions upon millions of planets to explore. Not really the same scope and same direction, so I don't like comparing them as much, but I definitely see why a lot of people do. And to wrap these area up of the things that I like here, the modding community. Obviously, they're already hard at work bringing community improvements and things that will obviously elevate the Starfield experience. Going to be pretty interesting to see what the community comes up with and how they kind of expand upon this game, because Starfield is a really good base for people who want to mod and add content and whatnot, because realistically, Bethesda did a good job putting together the groundwork, but now the modding community has the full scope to do whatever they want, and I feel like it's going to make this game much more replayable for much longer. It's going to add even more cool content for people to explore, and even then, some of the shortcomings that Bethesda did have in this game also can be, I guess, addressed by the community as well. So improvements to the product itself are more open. So also another thing, this doesn't really fit into the things I like because it's not a major thing, but the console commands. I really like that this game has console commands. It's pretty typical with Bethesda. It's not out of line for them, but having those console commands is great because as of right now, I think that's the only way that you can change like your FOV and whatnot. So pretty cool that that's there though, just to allow people to, you know, customize their experience even more. Now let's move on to the things that I dislike about Starfield, or things that annoy me about Starfield. So the like space system slash like world map is honestly a little confusing to learn, and it really just kind of seems more convoluted than it needed to be. When you're looking for specific planets, and especially when they can be in different star systems and whatnot, it is a little annoying to have to navigate through all of these little like sub-menus inside of the map that are like, oh, break it down to planet, to moon, to all this other stuff. Like, I feel like there was a better way they could have went about this, although it's not the worst thing, you know, it's not a game-breaking thing. I just think the map could have been simplified a lot more and been more efficient, especially since a good portion of the space traveling is used through the map. Like, there isn't seamless planet landing like with No Man's Sky, where you can go from atmosphere to the ground seamlessly. Even like leaving your ship, it's not some seamless thing. There's loading screens for that, loading screens for traveling between systems, loading screens for loading onto planets, all these different things. So I feel like they could have simplified that map. Another thing I dislike, the SSD requirement. Not the fact that it's required, but it seems that it slipped past a lot of people, and that includes me. At first, I put it on my HDD. I know a lot of people did, and if installed to an HDD, Starfield is essentially unplayable because of all the bugs, the glitches, the errors, the freezing. Now, to be perfectly clear, Starfield requires to be installed on an SSD, which was listed under the additional requirements on Steam. Personally, I never look in the additional requirements. I checked the storage. All it said is you needed like 125 gigs available on your drive. No mention of an SSD, so I made that mistake. And obviously, when I switched it over to an SSD, the game runs way better. I mean, it's literally not playable on an HDD. So do not put it on one. Don't try to load it on one. If you do, you're going to have a bad time. I just wish the communication was a little bit clearer on that one because, like I said, that one slipped past me and I'm sure a lot of other people too. And also, mentioning, like I did a second ago, most of the game is kind of bridged through these loading screens, which I get it to a degree because I'm sure in some areas, you know, that really helps kind of like handle some of the like engine or system limitations and kind of makes the game perform a little better. But from what people have been saying, it seems like in many areas that they have them, they're kind of just unnecessary. Like, for instance, on New Atlantis, you can go from like the top of New Atlantis or whatever all the way to the bottom without a loading screen if you just go outside and jump down. Yet, if you use the elevators, it's just like a loading screen in between these areas, which doesn't make sense. Like, it's not a necessity. So it seems like in some areas, the loading screens aren't really due to a system limitation. They're more due to just like personal designer preference. And that, I think, breaks the immersion a little bit. I mean, truth be told, if Starfield had that seamless, like, atmosphere to planet landing, like, you know, had that, like, seamless travel, I guess, that No Man's Sky has, I think it would be an ultimately much better game. Like I said, I get why in a lot of areas it probably can't have that, but in some areas it seems like it was just added for the sake of adding it, and I'm not a fan of that. So another thing I dislike is the game seems to start pretty slow, and a lot of people have voiced this as well. They're having trouble getting into it early game. Many people have said it's taken them until about 12 hours in to really start getting the game to click before they can really enjoy it, and I think a lot of it has to do with the personal choices you make. For instance, you know, maybe if you pick like a bounty hunter over being a diplomat or something, that affects the gameplay enough to where it's a little harder for you to get into it for a little longer, things like that, right? So I think some people are like making choices in the game that like kind of dilutes it a little longer, right? And it's making them not be able to get into it as fast. I was enthralled in Starfield about 3 to 4 hours in when I started kind of seeing what the potential was. And then now that I've been playing through some of the side quests and some of the main story and whatnot, I'm really getting into it the more that I've played it though. But I mean, I didn't expect it to be like balls to the wall action from the opening screen, but some of the early dialogue and some of like the early developments didn't really feel, you know, as impactful or necessary as they have in previous Bethesda titles. For instance, in Fallout 4, right, the game starts, you know, you're in this nice neighborhood, you got your family and everything, Codsworth, it's all nice, and then of course, the war breaks out. So you rush to the vault with everybody else, and you wait your time out, and then eventually, right, when you're freed and you're ready to leave the vault, there's like this magnificent cutscene, right, where you're exiting back out into the world for the first time, a hopeless wanderer, to kind of retake the fucking wasteland, right? It felt really impactful because this was the first time anyone from that was coming back, right? So like it felt big, but there wasn't really a moment like that in Starfield. It's kind of just like you're mining, and then, you know, the, I guess, artifact happens and you have your blackout and you see and hear shit. Then you got this guy who shows up and he decides that you gotta go talk to the Constellation, and then you go do that, right? It just, there's not like an impactful dive-in moment, you know what I mean? And to me, I feel like there could have been, because there's infinite possibility. Like, this is Starfield. We're in a fucking space exploration sim. Like, there could have been something, I feel like. There wasn't even like an initial, like, war never changes kind of fucking cutscene or anything. It just throws you in and honestly is underwhelming right off the jump with, like, how it could have introduced itself. But not really, I would say, the worst thing that could have happened. And then also, I have to mention this, because it's that bad, but the lock picking, or the digipick system, it sucks. It's actually bad. It's not fun. It's not even really, like, difficult per se. It's just tedious, unnecessary, and convoluted. It just seems like it makes what should be usually a pretty simple task way more complicated than it really needs to be. Now, I feel like that Bethesda really went into this like, oh, we're going to evolve that, you know, traditional Fallout-style lockpicking that we've had, you know, giving that element that we've had in previous franchises. Let's go ahead and bring that. But they didn't really add on it. They didn't build upon it. They just made it harder, made it more annoying, made it less worth my time, I feel like. Because a lot of the times when you are digipicking something, you're not really getting the reward that putting in a fucking full minute of digipicking this lock open really, I think, warrants. You know, I feel like it's just underwhelming. And honestly, the system could have just stayed the same and it really wouldn't have changed my opinion on the game. But they made this part worse, and it's actually fucking annoying to deal with. So with that being said, what did I think of Starfield altogether now that I've got, you know, the first couple days to play it? You know, I've got some time in the game and everything. Well, so far, I gotta say, the game lived up to my personal expectations. Now, like I said, I know a lot of people, they went into this and they were expecting like the greatest video game that ever was supposed to come out. And I thought it was gonna be pretty solid. I was definitely hoping for a good game. And I feel like that's what we got. I mean, it's not perfect, but in my opinion, it's damn good. Now, if you went into this game with like these industry revolutionizing standards where Starfield was gonna, you know, break the fucking third wall of video game creation and it was gonna make it just something that it was never before, you may be a little disappointed. But I didn't go into it with that expectation. I tried to keep myself a little more grounded in reality, and as a result, I feel like I got a pretty good product out of the game. I mean, I'm sure some people's expectations won't be met, and that's fine. I mean, the story doesn't really, so far, seem like it's for everyone. I mean, the main story itself, I think, could be a little bit written better and a little bit more enjoyable early on. But I mean, ultimately, it just seems like to a certain extent, many have this game like so hyped up that they're kind of destined for failure and destined for disappointment. But if you're looking for a great overall game, a good space exploration RPG that, you know, really hones in on those Bethesda traits and qualities, I do think this is the game for you. You know, if you're looking for a game that does give you a good variety and choice on how you engage with it, I think this is the game for you. I do think that this game is going to be a pretty big Game of the Year candidate. I don't think that's really up for debate at this point. It's like between that and like Baldur's Gate 3, maybe a couple other entries. For me personally, it is one of my favorite releases of the year. I do want to actually get further into the game and complete it before I can outright say it's my favorite, but it's definitely up there and it's definitely pretty good. And definitely compared to when No Man's Sky first released, which is a game I sat at the midnight release for, I gotta say, I think Starfield is definitely better on release. So overall, in my early review of Starfield, I'm gonna go ahead and give the game an 8.5 out of 10. It's definitely not perfect. The story could have been written better in some places. It could get to, being fun a little earlier instead of being, as convoluted as it is. Some of the, menus are a little tedious. The digi-picking's tedious, but ultimately, they did deliver on a lot of the promises that they made at Bethesda, and the RPG elements are good, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. And that's all that really matters to me, man, is that I'm having fun with it. I don't feel like by pre-ordering that I was robbed, which is one thing I can't say about most games I pre-ordered in the last, 5 years or whatever, but ultimately, that's just my opinion. I know a lot of other people are having different opinions, but, I just wanted to throw my early review out there of the game. So with that being said, thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel. Follow me over on Twitter and Twitch at @SubToOptimus. Make sure to check out Shoptimus down below. Thank you to my Watch Optimus subscribers. Your support helps the channel tremendously. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, talking about Starfield and signing out.